Okay, we are live. This is SYMF Messianic Fellowship. My name is Gene Keener. We are in our course on Galatians. We're in chapter 2. This is the final segment of chapter 2. And we're just now lighting up. And it's a couple minutes early, and I'm going to wait a few minutes until we actually start the Bible study proper, but I just wanted to get everything up. And it looks like everything is actually running and doing nicely. I'm not seeing any hang-ups or delays. Let me see if I can get things set up a little bit. Okay, if you want to type into the chat and say hello, and if you can give me an idea about how much delay we're having. Since I stopped using the video of my talking face, the delay has gotten down to about a minute or so. So if you can confirm that, that way just know what to expect and how to deal with it. I'd appreciate that. And then that's pretty much it for now. I'm just going to sit here and vamp for about a minute or 3 or 4, just to give people time to come in. Oops. There we are. Okay. I had typed in a message, but I forgot to send it. Oh, good. We're just getting started, and already I'm messing up. This is... okay, so it's not that good. I'm okay, really. All right, we got what we need here and here. This is our... okay, I think I kind of got our stuff set up here. And so, come on in, step up, sign your name on the chalkboard, say hello, and we'll get started. Still going to give it a few minutes for people to come in. And get settled in, go and grab your dinner and something to drink and sit down and enjoy the show. Should have some dancing and music to open up the day, but this is a low budget operation, so I am what you get. Sorry about that. Okay, we are I'm reading 6:02 on my clock. I don't know for sure how long of a delay we have, but that's okay. Give it a couple more minutes and we'll go ahead and get started. Yeah, it's all right. Okay, let's see what's going on. We did get permission from the church where we rent space to go ahead and start meeting again. However, it's we're still making sure that we're going to get the protocols and everything right for the meeting. I have a pretty good idea of what they're looking for, but I want to, we haven't yet as a board decided to go for it and resume meeting at our place. Actually, it'll be at the patio at the front, that big overhang patio with the comfortable chairs, which would be nice. But we still haven't moved forward on that. And until then, we're going to keep meeting on Sabbath at Cameron Park, right on the corner, near where our congregation usually meets. At least in an informal sense. We're not running any services or worship service and stuff like that, or prayer service. But we do just sit down, eat, hang out, and we will discuss the weekly portion, the weekly reading, and that's pretty much it right at this moment. We don't want to cause a ruckus by being too obvious about hanging out together. So we're just going to keep it informal and light until we can get back over to our space. Okay. It's almost 5 after 6. Let's go ahead and get started. Give me a moment to get all the screens lined up the way they're supposed to. And then we can get started. Let's see, that's that. Okay, that's just for reading. Then we have, that's our actual text. Shalom Ruhama. Ruhama on the chalkboard. Gail is dancing. I assume it's either because you're happy or we finally have a chance to get back into our regular place and begin our regular thing. We still need to have the board talk about this and make sure this is what we're going to do before we get all the way into just running in madly. Oh, one thing, Gail, you might want to consider or get a couple people together. You might want to open up the room and take a look around, make sure that things are in okay condition, and check to see if anything we left in the fridge probably needs to go at this point, I'm guessing. And can check the dry goods and the stuff in the cabinet just to make sure that nothing's gotten buggy or been chewed up or eaten up. Okay, if you can do that, that'd be great. Then that would be one thing on our list of stuff to do. Okay, it's 6 after. Let's go ahead. We're in Galatians chapter 2. I'm going to take a running start into our segment, and we're going to start sort of midstream in Paul's description of explaining why he is authorized to be an apostle to the Gentiles. And one of the aspects is Paul's confrontation of Peter in Antioch. Antioch, I think that's where it was. Anyways, we're going to start at verse 14, and we're going to start our reading for the week in verse 17. But this is just sort of a running start to get us into what's going on. Okay, verse 14. But when I saw that they were not walking a straight path, keeping in line with the truth of the good news, I said to Kepha, right in front of everyone, if you who are a Jew live like a Goy and not like a Jew, why are you forcing the Goyim to live like Jews? We are Jews by birth, not so-called Goyish sinners. Even so, we have come to realize that a person is not declared righteous by God on the grounds of his legalistic observance of Torah commandments, but through the Messiah Yeshua's trusting faithfulness. Therefore, we too have put our trust in Messiah Yeshua and have become faithful to him, in order that we might be declared righteous on the ground of Messiah's trusting faithfulness, and not on the grounds of our legalistic observance of Torah commandments. For on the ground of legalistic observance of Torah commandments, no one will be declared righteous. Okay, we covered this last week. If you want to pull down Galatians 2d, that's the study on this section. Very important to understand exactly what Paul is saying, because he's making statements on a specific point, but because Paul has been so mistaught and his words have been so twisted, people are commonly teaching something actually rather opposite of what he was saying. So we need to carefully go through this, and I know I really strained on it last week, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to strain on it a little bit more in this section, because this ends pretty much his explanation of why he is who he is, and why he has the right to be an apostle and to speak for God to the Gentiles. So verse 17, okay? But if, in seeking to be declared righteous by God through our union with the Messiah, we ourselves are indeed found to be sinners, then is the Messiah an aider and abetter of sin? Heaven forbid. Indeed, if I build up again the legalistic bondage which I destroyed, do I really make myself a transgressor? I really do make myself a transgressor, so I'm misreading that. For it was through letting the Torah speak for itself that I died to its traditional legalistic misinterpretation. Dr. Stern went through great effort to try to use terminology, and he kind of had to invent a few phrases and words to get this, why it reads so thick and so hard to easily understand. That's why I died to its traditional legalistic misinterpretation so that I might live in direct relationship with God. When the Messiah was executed on the stake as a criminal, I too, so that my proud ego no longer lives, but the Messiah lives in me, and the life I now live in my body, I live by the same trusting faithfulness that the Son of God had, who loved me and gave himself up for me. I do not reject God's gracious gift. For if the way in which one attains righteousness is through legalism, then the Messiah's death was pointless. Okay, so that's our text for the day. And let me get this up. Okay, verse 18. Sorry, I started a verse early on our reading for today. Okay, so Shaul, that's Paul in Hebrew. Shaul says, "For if I build again those things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor." Context is everything if you want to understand this. The basic gist of what Paul was writing to the Galatian congregations, which were primarily Gentile congregations, mixed group, but the text to what Paul is writing is to the Gentiles in these congregations. Okay, the basic problem, and I'll reiterate it, is Paul had been dealing with the congregations in the region of Galatia, but people came up from Jerusalem claiming they had authority from James to teach that you must become Pharisees in order to belong to God and be part of the family of God. This Paul argued strongly against, and this is the whole argument of the letter to the Galatians. You don't have to be a Pharisee to belong to God. You don't have to go through conversion in order to be part of the family. And we'll see later on another chapter later that Paul makes a statement that if you are Messiahs, you are already Abraham's seed. There is nothing you need to do to add to what God has done for you. And so the whole argument then is don't become a Pharisee. Now this has a very modern argument to it because modern Orthodox Judaism is extremely similar to Pharisaism of that day. A lot of the rules are the same. Now, within modern Orthodox, there's a ton more rules that have been invented. But there are rules that you do to be a Pharisee, and your righteousness is determined on how well you keep those rules. Okay? And so you can proudly boast that you keep all the rules and you do everything perfectly, and therefore you are better than everybody else, and you have the right to say so. Paul is arguing against this mentality. And in fact, you go back to Acts 15, there was no such obligation put on Gentiles to become Pharisees. In fact, you look at the beginning of the chapter, the beginning of the arguments there, the first issue was you have to become a Pharisee just to get saved. That was rejected out of hand. The next argument came back is, okay, these guys can come in as Gentiles, but they have to become Pharisees to be legit. They have to be Pharisees to be part of the community and accepted. That was actually rejected too. And even James makes the statement that why should we ask the Gentiles to do the things that we ourselves don't do? Okay, he's not talking about Torah. He's not talking about God's commandments. He's talking about Pharisaism. He's saying we don't do the Pharisee thing, so why should we require Gentiles to do the Pharisee thing? In fact, the only responsibilities that they put on the Gentiles was stop doing these four things, which are the worst of the pagan worship practices of that day, and then go find yourself a synagogue and go in there and learn. So the idea was you're going to learn from Moses, you're going to learn from Torah, you're going to learn from God's commandments how to live a righteous life before a holy God. You don't need Pharisaism to do that. Well, when you get to Galatia, to the Galatia region, Pharisees came up with the premise that they came under authority from the Jerusalem congregation. The phrase is literally from James. Um, and that you have to become Pharisees to be legit. You have to become Pharisees. And this is the same argument you hear in Orthodoxy, even in today, even to today. Their big argument is, oh, no, no, this Messiah thing, okay, but, if you really want to belong to God, you must become Orthodox or you really don't belong. You're really not part of us if you're not Orthodox. And so a lot of people get sucked into thinking they can half lie their way into becoming Orthodox um, in order to, to belong to God properly. Well, it doesn't work. And in the long run, it doesn't work. So, um, so here's in verse 18. Let's get back to our text for the day. The whole argument is stated right here. The accusation against Paul at times, and you get into the book of Acts, one of the accusations against Paul is that he's teaching people to forsake Moses. In other words, to dump the commandments of God. And then they said, hey, there's a voluntary vow that there's some people are on. You go and perform these vows too, and everybody will know that you walk in God's commandments and you're not, all the stuff that's being said about you is not true. So Paul went and did that. Okay? But here's Paul's statement. This comes out of his, I want to say out of his mouth, but it's right off of his pen. Okay? For if I build again those things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. Okay? My Englishman's Greek New Testament, this is about as literal as I can get in the translation. For if what I threw down, those things again I build, a transgressor myself I constitute. And every time I read Englishman's Greek New Testament, I just can't help but get Yoda's voice in my head because the syntax of Yoda's speech very closely mimics Greek. And so I just keep that voice keeps coming in my head when I read out of Englishman's Greek New Testament. So to build, okay, oikodomo, something like that. To build a house, to erect a building, as a metaphor to found or to establish. Okay. Commentary appears to relate to the Qumran community's dislike of the Pharisaic claim to be the builders of Judaism, the scholars through whom the knowledge of Torah was disseminated. And that's true even in Orthodoxy today. They claim to be the builders of Judaism, the ones who make it happen, the one who organized it. And the Pharisees, historically speaking, were not that old to be the originators of Judaism. The Pharisee party as a group came after the Maccabee restoration, I should say. Restoration, the return to God's commandments, the return to taking back the temple and cleansing it and putting it back to use. So Pharisaism as a party came around about that time. So it wasn't all the way back to the beginning to Moses, and it certainly wasn't back to the Great Sanhedrin, which was established on the return from Babylon, which is where most of our quote modern unquote traditions have their base. Okay, so what's Paul saying? Well, first let's take a look at build and destroy. Build and destroy, by the way, you see within Jewish religious language, to build is to make it great, to destroy is to get rid of it. This shows up in Paul's letter to Romans when he says, it's translated in English, I establish the law. In other words, I make it great. So the phrase there, in the phrase in Hebrew or in Hebrew would have been, I build the law. Okay, if you're against something, then you are destroying it. Okay, and in Greek the word is katalio. Okay, again my Greek. To dissolve, to disunite what has been joined together, to destroy, demolish, as a metaphor to overthrow, to render vain, deprive of success, or bring to naught. Now, if Paul says he came not to destroy the law, but to build it, why do we say Paul's instructions tell us it's okay to to make nil the commands of God. Okay, you see the problem there? What's being taught is not what's there in the text. Okay. Taking a look at Matthew 5:17, I came not to think not I came to destroy the law and the prophets. I came not to destroy, but to fulfill. Romans 3:31, again, I don't think I came to destroy the law. On the other hand, on quite the contrary, I build the law. Okay, the concept of loosing and binding, which we see in the Brit Hadashah, also has this same understanding. To loose something means to make it more plentiful. To bind something is to restrict it. Okay, so just think of your farm animals. If you loose your animals, you set them loose in the pasture, they're free to run around and go wherever they go. But if you bind them so they can't walk around, then they're restricted. So loosing and binding. Okay, if Paul had already jettisoned his previous allegiance to Pharisaic authority only to once again return to rebuild it, then he would have been guilty of having gone around the written commandment, and he would be guilty of the sin called transgression, which again is the Hebrew word pesha, meaning to be willful in rebellion, actions with a high hand. Okay? And I want to get back to the text again just to point up where we're all going with this. So if I build again, the word again there is important, those things which I destroyed, okay, I make myself a transgressor. In other words, if Paul is for Pharisaism, which he was arguing against to the Galatians and to other places, remember he was sent as an apostle to the Gentiles by the Jerusalem congregation. He was sent specifically by Antioch to go and to preach the good news to the Gentiles. Okay. And he was not using Pharisaism as the model of a holy lifestyle. He was using Torah, God's commandments, directly. Okay. So if he goes back, he's arguing against Pharisaism, but now if you think he's going to go back and again build or to promote Pharisaism, he's going to make himself a transgressor. Okay. In modern parlance, he would make himself a hypocrite. He'd make himself a hypocrite. Okay, so get down to the next paragraph. Nu, that's Yiddish for so. So what has Shaul destroyed? Take a look at Philippians 3:1-11. Pharisaism is not needed for salvation or even inclusion into God's family. Okay, and that's the point Paul is getting at. The entire letter is summed up in that idea. Pharisaism is not needed for salvation or even inclusion into God's family. This is a direct opposition to what the Pharisees who came up from Jerusalem, claiming they came from James, were trying to get the Galatian Gentiles to do. Okay? Teaching one to submit to a rabbinic doctrine that elevates a second revelation over that of what Moses transmitted to us in writing is just as heinous as rejecting Yeshua. Not Yeshua. Yehovah himself. Okay, and take a look at Yeshayahu, Isaiah 29:13. I've been making a habit of citing these things in our text since we have an unlimited amount of pages to use. However, today I have to confess, I was getting everything set up and I realized that I had set up the wrong text for today. And so I had to wipe that out, start over real fast, and this is as far as I got. So you'll just have to do your own homework and dig it up yourself. Sorry about that. Well, actually, I'm not that sorry. You know what I mean. Dive into your own Bibles and read them for yourself. From another point of view, what I destroyed was the phrase that, this is Dr. Stern, what I destroyed is what Paul was saying, was not only a legalistic system, but also a form of idolatry, namely ethnolatry. Okay, that's a new one. In which I took pride in being Jewish and insisted that keeping Jewish distinctives is essential to being part of God's people, even for Gentiles. Now, if I build up again that ethnolatry, I gotta look at that carefully, ethnolatry, I make myself a transgressor of the true Torah, which says that because God is one, Deuteronomy 6:4, he is God of both Jews and Gentiles, Romans 3:27 to 31. Romans, yeah. And therefore accepts the trusting faithfulness of Gentiles without requiring them to become Jews to a point on which Shaul expands in Romans 4. Okay? So the idea here is Paul cannot, without being hypocritical, tell people you must pursue Pharisaism in order to be holy. Now, does that mean absolutely everything that Pharisaism teaches or modern Orthodox teaches is wrong and evil? No. There are many traditions that are proposed, and some of them can be useful. Okay? And so what we need to do as Messianics is to look at those traditions and say, this can be useful, that does not. Okay? And that's how we need to approach the reading of the scriptures and the presentation of Pharisaism or modern orthodoxy as some people say, the only righteous way of life, which is not, but that's the argument Paul is making. It's not. He's saying it's not. Okay? And we need to go back to Torah itself. We need to go back to God's commandments itself in order to make the right decisions about how we live a holy and righteous lifestyle before God. Okay? We can employ tradition when it doesn't interfere with God's commandments or our walk with God. We don't have to. Okay? I always like to make the great example, because for me this is a very important tradition, is to light the candles before sundown on Friday evening. Okay? It's tradition. Nothing in Scripture says we got to do this. But for us, at least for me, it's a tremendous psychological marker that the work week is over and Sabbath has begun. And all our stress and striving and running around, you can take a deep breath and go, we made it. Okay? And so for me, it's a very important tradition. Okay, do I require that people do it? No, I suggest you try it because you might find it's just as precious for you. But I'm not going to denounce anybody or say that they're sinning or that they're not walking right with God if they decide they don't care to light candles on Friday afternoon before sundown. It's your own choice. It's your own decision. And there are many other traditions we employ much the same way. Okay, we have a fairly traditional prayer service in the congregation. Not everybody attends that traditional prayer service, which we do in the morning. A lot of people show up in time for lunch for some reason, and they stick around for our weekly Parsha discussion, and that's really the big the big attendance for the day, and then it tails off when we get into a Bible study after that. So understand, you're free to come and go when it comes to tradition. You don't have to. You may find it's useful, but you don't have to. Okay, verse 19. For through the law I died to the law that I might live to God. Okay, Englishman's Greek New Testament. For I, through law, to law, died, that to God I may live. Okay. A great example of law being used differently in the same sentence. For I, through Torah, to Pharisaic rules died, that I might properly live before God. That's GKV, that's my translation, that's my interpretation. Okay? Remember in his letter to the Galatians, Paul uses the word nomos in Greek, that we translate as law, at least 4 different ways. Some people say 6, but I think 4. It doesn't matter. 4 different ways that he uses the word law, and he doesn't explain which use he uses, which understanding he uses when he uses the word nomos, law, in his Greek text. So we have to figure it out by context. Okay, the 4 are law being God's commandments. The second is law being Pharisaic instructions. The third being the law of sin and death, the soul that sins it shall die. and the law of the law of the desire that resides in our flesh, Romans chapter 7. Okay, that law. Um, okay, some people cite a couple others. Okay, it's okay. Um, but here, which law are we talking about? That for I through the law died to the law. Now, if you make if you make a superficial reading of this, you're thinking you kind of blur through the, but I I the law died to the law. I through the law died to the law. That doesn't make a lot of sense if you're talking about God's Torah. In both cases, the word law is used. Okay, it does make sense though if the law, the first iteration, is God's commandments, Torah, and the second is the Pharisaic instructions, the Pharisaic rules. And you notice I'm careful to not use the word law when I'm talking about the Pharisee rules. I want to make sure that we're very clear. The word law really doesn't properly apply in applying to the rules that the Pharisees put together, or even modern Orthodox for that matter. They don't rise to the level of laws that God gave. They shouldn't. Some people treat them that way. Some people think that man-made rules are superior, um, but it should never be. God's commandments are God's commandments, and we, you know, a lot of the rules that we embrace are just learning how to go about doing what God had commanded. That's fine, okay? But if we're inventing something new or something that contradicts, then that is plainly wrong, okay? Okay, so this is an example of law being used two different ways in the same sentence. So I made my best guess of how to explain this. So, for I through Torah to Pharisaic rules died that I might properly live before God. Okay, now that makes sense. And if you have an objection with that, I'm certainly happy to talk with you about that. And we can certainly walk through this and talk through it. Okay, the other half of that phrase, for it was through letting the Torah speak for itself that I died to its traditional legalistic misinterpretation. Okay, Dr. Stearns is working very carefully around issues that he had to deal with in his translation. The Jewish New Testament was published in early mid-80s, 1980s. Okay, and there was a big thing going on at that time called the Word of Faith. And so a lot of what Dr. Stern wrote in his translation, his interpretation, was carefully wording to avoid using the word faith. You notice in Complete Jewish Bible, in the New Testament part, you do not see the word faith there. That's because the word faith was so horribly abused during this time that he wanted nothing to do with it. And so he uses legalistic interpretation or trusting, loving kindness or trusting, not legalistic interpretation, but trusting. He used trust more than rather than use faith in his translation because it conveys the same meaning but doesn't stumble into what people were misteaching about faith during that era. Okay, so. So it's through letting the Torah speak for itself that I died to its traditional legalistic misinterpretations. Okay, the Greek is, forget me trying to say that. Okay, literally, for I through nomos, to nomos died. And through nomos, to nomos. Yeah. Now you notice that in the Greek, nomo is one the first time, and nomo is a different. Same root word, but different treatment. This gives me the idea why there needs to be a different rendering in the word law there, a different understanding. Okay, it's a different ending. It's got a different tense and application. I do not know Greek well at all, so don't ask me to explain in detail what those differences are. A good general rule of interpretation is that if a word appears more than once in a passage, its meaning stays the same throughout the passage. Here we have an exception. This is somebody's commentary, and I think I forgot to properly identify whom. Here we have an exception. The phrase means For I through Torah to legalism died. I know that because Shaul avoids the natural Greek word order in order to place two forms of the word nomos side by side. This signals the reader that something unusual is going on, specifically that the sense of the first nomos differs from that of the second. My expanded translation brings out that the first nomos is the true Torah, the Torah understood properly as requiring trusting faithfulness, while the second is a perversion of the Torah into a legalistic system. Okay. Should straighten that out. Who am I citing on that? So I think it was. Let me screen. Okay. No, I'm not going to get it in one quick swoop. Okay. Never mind. Okay. Okay, so again. So that I might live in a direct relationship with God. Instead of being shut off from God by legalistic misinterpretation of the Torah, literally, so that to God I might live, there is a Torah to be observed, but it isn't the legalistic system made of it by much of the non-Messianic Jewish world. And there's the point that we really need to focus in. Okay, there are God's commandments that we have to pay attention to because they're important to Him. Okay, so we should follow what He says in His commandments. But the religious observance system is not that system. Okay, it is legalism wasn't a word invented in Greek by when Paul was writing, so he had to use inventive language to explain this. Okay, so the legalistic system made of it by the much non-Messianic Jewish world. That's then and even now. There's a very legalistic system that is not based on God's commandments, but based on man-made tradition. Okay, verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Okay. When the Messiah was executed on the stake as a criminal, so was I. Okay. Now remember Isaiah 53:10. Okay, the heart of the gospel, the heart of the good news, is that the statement in Isaiah 53:10 is very difficult to translate because everything's pronouns, and it takes a while to work through it. But essentially, what it means is, if you look upon the sacrifice of Messiah, and you tell God you want that sacrifice to count for me, He will make it count for me. Okay, or count for you, I should say. He'll make it count for you. And that's the heart of the good news. So when we call upon Messiah for our salvation, we're asking Him to take on our behalf our sins and our transgressions against God. Okay, God promises when you do that, He makes it so. Okay, so when He died, I died. Okay, because I join Him in that sense. I put my life in with Messiah's life. So when He died, in the sense that I died along with Him, and so His sacrifice counts for me. Okay. So I was executed on the stake as a criminal. Literally, with Messiah, I've been co-crucified. Matthew 10:38. The Messiah was not a sinner, let alone a criminal, but He was executed like one, the stake or cross being the electric chair of its day. On the other hand, says Shaul, I am a sinner, therefore in God's sight a criminal. By uniting myself with the Messiah, through putting my trust in Him, I share in His death, Romans 6:2. Thus the penalty for my sin is paid, and I am dead. Okay? So, if the penalty's paid, what do you have to pay? Nothing. If you're already dead, what price can you pay? None. Okay? So the picture of, in my flesh I am dead, counts for us to say that in Messiah there's nothing left for God to judge. Okay? The judgment was whole and complete when Messiah said, "It is finished." And all we do is we access it. We access it by inviting God to make that death count for us. Okay? So my proud ego no longer lives. Literally, I no longer live. That is, my old nature with its evil desire no longer controls me. One can regard all of Romans 6:1 to 8:13 as a midrash on this verse. Midrash is a study, an investigation, if you will, into this concept. Okay, I no longer live, but Messiah who lives in me. Okay, because the Messiah lives in me, I am able to live by the same trusting faithfulness that the Son of God had. See also back to verse 16, the third part of it, which enabled him to love me and give himself up for me. My entire life must be imbued by this Spirit. Anything else, anything less, falls short of faith in and faithfulness to Yeshua the Messiah. Dr. Stern's commentary. Okay. A follow-up on being dead, with the release from bondage to the law of the fleshly desires, or in this case, the rules of Pharisaism. Okay. Again, that comment in Romans chapter 7, where there's that not only the law of sin and death, but also the law of the fleshliness of our members who war against us. Okay, if we are dead, then the flesh has no power. Okay, and that law is no longer has any power over us. Okay, and in this case, there's sort of an equation between the law of fleshly desires and pursuing Pharisaism to make yourself righteous. Okay, to benefit yourself in the eyes of others, to make yourself great in the eyes of others. Okay, Pharisaism, pursuing things that you don't need to do just because people tell you should do it or you have to do it just to be part of the family. That's not true. Okay, verse 21. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness comes through the law, then Christ died in vain. If we can be saved merely by being a Pharisee, Yeshua is unnecessary. That's my take on it. Okay, we can't set aside the grace of God. Now, if righteousness came through the law, then Christ died in vain. How does righteousness come through the law? Actually, we become righteous when we obey the law of God. But again, which use of law here? Okay, if obeying the law does not give you righteousness, then which law are we talking about? Okay, that would be Pharisaism. Okay, Pharisaism is that law in this case. Okay, we do keep the commandments of God, and it makes us righteous. It doesn't save us, but it makes us righteous. Okay, when we belong to God and we walk in His ways, we proclaim the magnificence of Almighty God, and that He needs to be taken seriously because I take Him, and I show that by me taking Him seriously by obeying His commandments. It's not our salvation, but it is a sign of our salvation. Okay. If we can be saved merely by being a Pharisee, Yeshua is unnecessary. So I said that already. Okay. I do not reject God's gracious gift. Literally, God's grace. His chesed, Hebrew for loving kindness. What is that gift? First, the death of the Messiah, Yeshua, on my behalf, which gives me forensic righteousness. This is Dr. Stern's commentary. I like that phrase, forensic righteousness. And second, His life, which is making me actually righteous in my behavior on the two kinds of righteousness. See above at verse 16. We talked about this last week or 2 weeks ago. And the forensic righteousness, just to explain this for Dr. Stern's sake, he was fighting with trying to explain the two ways to explain righteousness, because you have the imputed righteousness where because we are in Messiah, we are declared righteous, but then we also have righteousness because we live a righteous lifestyle. And so Dr. Stern wrestled with this and came up with the idea of the phrase forensic righteousness. In other words, this is discovered for you. Okay, it's discovered for you that you are declared righteous. Okay, it doesn't lessen or remove or put on a pedestal the righteousness that you gain by living a holy lifestyle. Okay, and again, it's not our right. It's not that righteousness that which counts towards our salvation. It is righteousness which counts to our relationship with God, not our salvation. The forensic righteousness, the imputing, the declaration that we are righteous. That is our salvation. Okay, but what do we do with that now that we are saved? You know, Paul makes that argument in Romans. Now that we're saved, we can live any way we want. Right? 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 No. You belong to God now. So you live a life that shows that you belong to God. Okay? And that means behavioral righteousness. Okay? So if the way in which one attains righteousness is through legalism, through any form of self-generated effort, and specifically through legalistic following of Torah commandments, then Messiah's death was pointless, and so is his ongoing resurrected life. It is clear from the context, 2 verses later, when we get into chapter 3, that the word righteousness in Greek is dikaiosune. Here refers not only to being declared innocent, but to becoming holy. The other 3 times in Galatians that Shaul uses that word, 3:6 and 21, verse 21 also, and also 5:5. He also means behavioral and not merely forensic righteousness, that imputed righteousness. Such progress toward holiness does not result in an instant of trust followed by a lifetime of legalism, but from trusting faithfulness that endures until death. Because God says this is true, we live that way. Because God says this is good, we do this. Because God says don't do that, we don't do that. Okay? So it's not legalism, but trusting that what God says is right and good and applicable to us. Okay? And it's not legalism in the sense that I cannot declare myself more righteous than somebody else because of how I live. Okay? I'm just as much a sinner as anybody else who is saved, who is redeemed. So my pursuit of holiness through obeying God is not the cause of my not the cause of my relationship with God. It's the result of my relationship with God. It's because I have a relationship, I want to do the stuff that pleases Him, and that's His commandments. Okay. Last question from a different commentator, Galatians 2:21 versus Deuteronomy 6:24 and 25. Is Paul contradicting Torah? And the answer is impossible. Okay? Paul cannot contradict the Torah. So there's no way you can say that keeping the commandments gets you saved. Keeping the commandments improves your relationship, but it doesn't get you saved. And that's the point. Okay. You know what I've been talking all along, and I forgot to check the bulletin board to see if anybody has anything to say. So, if you have any questions, comments, rebukes, get on it. Type in a question, and we can discuss it. Okay. Shalom, Vince. Good to see you. Okay. What I'd like to do, thank you for asking for a copy of the study. I already sent over to Linda. Oh, you know what? I got to replace that before you can put it up. But she's supposed to be putting it up on the website and also on Facebook. And as soon as I'm done here, I'm going to send the corrected version over to her. So because it was chapter 1 E rather than chapter 2E. And don't ask me how I managed that, but I caught it today when I was looking at it that the text here doesn't look quite right. So So, um, give me a little bit to get that fixed, and then we can you can download it from the website or from I believe she's posting these things on Facebook also. Okay. Any other questions, comments, rebukes? And just for the sake of optics, I don't want to be handing stuff out to a bunch of people at the park. Uh oh, it's Carolyn. Okay. As long as I got you here and we're hanging out for a second, uh, just pray for my dad. Um, he's going to be moving in with us. He's had an episode yesterday where he just is having a real hard time and not moving well. He's not talking well. He's not thinking well. So just keep him in prayer. And so we want to take good care of him, and we're going to take him in here, and we need to we are we're needing go downstairs and then make sure he gets it. Okay. Okay. So sorry, I'm listening to another conversation while I'm trying to talk. Um, okay, so just keep him in prayer. We have a lot of stuff to do and to organize, and it's going to be what we got to do. And so so just keep that in prayer. We've decided with my sisters that we like the idea of having him stay here and then have an in-house care. I don't know if that's going to work out all day every day, or a couple days a week for whatever. I don't know, but we're still yet to figure that out. So if you have any suggestions or references as to somebody good for home health care that is available in Riverside, or to come out to basically we're on the far side of Riverside. It's not a short drive. Um, so let's do that. Just let me know, I should say, and so we can follow up on it, because at this point we need to get that organized, and we need to figure out what Medicare is going to cover for him. So find out what kind of help we're going to get. Okay. Anyways, any other questions, comments, rebukes? If not, we'll close off today, and I will leave this running for a couple minutes longer, just so we don't cut off the end of it accidentally. But I'll be done talking here, and I'll just be quietly snoozing or something. Okay? All right. Shalom, everybody. We'll see you Shabbat. We'll see you next Wednesday right here on this time, this station. Shalom. Caroline was trying to call Dad, but I guess he didn't answer. There was a message, and I told her I'll be off the phone and go downstairs, make sure he gets the, and it didn't ring, so I don't know. Well, so I said just call her. Yeah, just call her. I'm just letting the time run out before I shut it off. Okay, that's going to do. I'm going to shut everything off. Shalom, everybody. God bless you.